My topic, as you can see here, our topic is Defusing the Demographic Time Bomb, a cultural gerontological approach to the burden narrative of old age. You probably heard The Who, My Generation, when you came in, and there is this one line where the singer sings, "The things they do are awfully cold, I wish I die before I get old." This is the narrative that we'll be looking at now within the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, and we'll deconstruct them. Helen talked about extended life expectancy already, and she talked about critical gerontological perspectives. I'm now going to add to that we'll analyze a short story, and not fully analyze it, but I'll introduce it to you. And I'll also introduce to you the field of cultural gerontology. So how many of you know what gerontology is? Yeah, a couple of hands up there. I think Roberta does know, yes. She's actually the pioneer of cultural gerontology in Europe. And she's not only a dictator and a prime minister, she's also the president of the European Network in Aging Studies. You see the roll-up over there. And everything I know here actually I've learned from you, I guess. So, gerontology, you know what that is? And you know what geriatrics is, but what's the difference between these fields? Ah, you know? Yes. Mm-hmm. You worked as a geriatrician, or in the geriatric field. Okay. So we'll talk about gerontology today, not about geriatrics. And I'd like to start again with a slide that Helen also tackled, in a way, the contents of this. The trouble is that old age is not interesting until one gets there. A foreign country with an unknown language to the young and even to the middle-aged. So as Helen said, you probably didn't think this would somehow concern you, but maybe after this morning you'll think differently about this. Unlike other categories of difference, such as race, class, gender, or sexuality, or able-bodiedness, age, in particular old age, will be the only difference we grow into, as Helen also said, if we're lucky enough to live that long. And Pat McNamara talked yesterday about the way we imagine our future selves, or we imagine our lives, and he actually didn't name it, but he referred to a theory that's called the end of history illusion. And this was put together by renowned psychologists Ulla Kriebernegg, Daniel Gilbert, and Timothy Wilson, and they argue in an article in Science that we measured the personalities, values, and preferences of more than 19,000 people who ranged in age from 18 to 68, and asked them to report how much they had changed in the past decade, and or to predict how much they would change in the next decade. Young people, middle-aged people, and older people all believed they had changed a lot in the past, but would change relatively little in the future. People, it seems, regard the present as a watershed moment at which they have finally become the person they will be for the rest of their lives. This is called the end of history illusion. So imagine yourselves now, briefly, for the rest of your lives. What will you be? How will you grow old? And they call this an illusion. And now we'll do a little bit of a reality check. What can we do about the reality of growing old? The overview of my talk is like this, a crash course into cultural gerontology, just 2 slides. Then we'll talk briefly of age waves, of silver tsunamis, and demographic time bombs. And then we'll dive deeper into the reading of Margaret Atwood's Torching the Dusties as a satirical burden narrative of old age. So that's what we're going to do. Gerontology comes from Greek, geron, old man, and logi, the study of, and is the study of the social, psychological, and biological aspects of aging. It is distinguished from geriatrics, which is the branch of medicine, as you said, yeah, that studies the disease of the elderly. Gerontology examines the biological, economic, psychological, social, health, fitness aspects of the aging process. There's something missing there, isn't it? Literature, philosophy, spirituality, self-reflection, the existential questions about aging have in the 20th century become marginalized argues sociologist Stephen Katz from Trent University in Canada. As a case in point, he refers to an early 20th century textbook on aging by Dr. Ilya Ilyich Mechnikov, the man who actually coined the term gerontology, and you can see him up here in 1903. 4 full chapters in this textbook, a medical textbook also, are dedicated to Goethe's Faust. So gerontology did actually start out as a multidisciplinary endeavor, but it got lost, so literature and spirituality and philosophy got lost and splintered along the way. And this is now where cultural gerontology comes in, and also literary gerontology. It is now an interdisciplinary endeavor, and this is why Roberta, for example, was instrumental, and also a group of researchers, Helen Kivnig as well, and the GSA, the Gerontological Society of America, that included the humanities aspects now in changing the perspective of what humanities can do to gerontology. When academics study aging, they usually address aging in terms of problem solving, often explicitly referring to the problem of old age. What literary scholars or the humanities, which are completely lacking in the definition above, can contribute to gerontology is, according to Sally Chivers, what Larry Polifka has probably best expressed at the 1994 conference, Aging and Identity, a Humanities Perspective. And he argued the humanities can help older people to understand the narratives of their own lives, and can also assist gerontologists and others who work with the elderly in their efforts to preserve their clients' dignity, identity, and self-worth. And this actually comes very closely to what Helen presented earlier on. In what follows, I would like to examine narrative fiction's particular role in addressing the social problems, not only of old age, but of negative preconceptions of old age, in order, as Chivers argues, to challenge the preconceptions about aging that influence our thinking about later life. The way we think about later life, that has to be challenged. Cultural representations of age, that means literature, film, postcards such as this, are not only mirrors of society, but we also need to see the subversive potential of such text to change prevailing norms. Now this text here, the postcard, doesn't really have a subversive potential, but we can give it a subversive potential if we, as cultural gerontologists, analyze it. So maybe you thought, oh, this is really funny, old women, I hope my warning won't, yeah. This is actually not funny, it's absolutely ageist. Ageism still goes down quite well with many people, while sexism, racism, and other isms do not. But you can say things about old age that you can't possibly say about any other differences in this matrix of sex, class, race, gender, age, disability, and so on, able-bodiedness. So a re-evaluation of narratives of aging, so we have to see them anew, especially those constructed in literature and film, can, as Chivers says, provide a new vantage point on what is inevitable to late life and what is imposed from without. What happens anyway, but how is it constructed, also in cultural terms? Literary scholars analyze patterns of and within such narratives, and can do so with an eye to maintaining an image of aging that entails a complex array of physical, social, and cultural factors. We look at pictures such as this, for example, and this, you know, this expression, you're over the hill. There's this keep calm, you're over the hill thing. But you get birthday cakes like this. You get a lot of postcards that make fun of aging. And this is, you see this, as you don't have to be a cultural gerontologist to get the meaning of this, yeah? Green grass on the one side, nice life, but then at 60, it goes really downhill. Yeah? It's really a sad life after 60. 60 is this marking point, isn't it, right? Right at 60, it goes, oh, wait a minute, maybe not. So when is it downhill? At what age? When is it a problem? When are you old? You probably have a lot of numbers now in your mind. There is no such thing as old and young, really. For my daughter, I'm 43. I'm pretty old, I guess. For many of you, maybe. But then for other people who are in their 80s and 90s, they think I'm very young still. So it's a movable marker, this age category. Yeah? But it's presented as a binary, young versus old. And this is what we try to break up. We try to break up this binary of young versus old. And that's the book by Sally Chivers, who argues that narrative, and that this is how we do it as literary gerontologists, narrative is not only a resource to be mined to determine and test cultural attitudes towards the elderly. Narrative provides the clues to the creation of stereotypes that fix old age as a time of decline. So when we talk about texts, books, films, and so on, we can actually re-narrate this time of old age, and we can counteract the stereotypical depictions. I briefly want to introduce an aspect that Roberta wrote about in her book, and she determines, she talks about the difference, as also does Margaret Morgenroth-Goulet, who some of you may now know after the seminars with Helen Kivnick and Kim Sawchuk. Age is a culturally constructed category, okay? The biological age means the years you've lived, the time you've lived, and the cultural ascriptions of qualities. So what we ascribe to old age, because of chronology, can be called cultural age. In Salty Old Women, Roberta argues that in the 1980s, gender was established as a methodological approach to literature and culture. Since the 1990s, age has been included in the traditional matrix, race, class, gender, and so on. When we, and women and more, etc. When we talk about questions of difference, gender, race, class, ethnicity, age needs to be included and seen as a culturally constructed category. While aging and age was only relevant for gerontologists and medical professions who worked on the so-called realities of aging, science studies, yeah. Cultural gerontologists have begun as cultural critics to analyze narrative constructs of aging and old age. What is even more important, this approach can also open the door for new models of conceptualizing old age. So we want to rethink old age. Similar to feminist theory, as Hedda Loeb also pointed out on Monday, which differentiates between sex and gender, we have to differentiate between chronological and cultural age, Roberta Meyerhofer argues in her book. So it's again this binary that we have to break up. One of the things we as literary gerontologists can do, and will do now in this little presentation here, is to, for example, analyze the metaphors that we use to talk about old age. And that leads me now to part 2, demographic time bomb, Silver Tsunami. You can think about what this is, the Silver Tsunami, yeah? By 2030, there will be 72.1 million older Americans. Oh my God. Yeah? So that's the Silver Tsunami. Are you ready for this gray flood? And I'm going now to show you a film. I discovered this movie yesterday night when I was preparing for this class. I Googled again Silver Tsunami because I wanted to have a good picture for my PowerPoint slides. And I came across that movie. It's very new. It came out in 2014, very late, and it's now advertised. And it's just a 2 or 3 minute clip that I will play to you, a YouTube clip. But watch out for the metaphors. I think I don't have to explain to you what is happening here, but if you just, yeah, it's quite amazing. And I listened to an interview with the filmmaker. Her name is Cynthia Harrison. She's a US-based filmmaker, and she said, I just love making documentary because I love telling the truth. And this is also what we as literary critics, of course, know. Documentary is not the truth. There is no such thing as the truth. It's constructed. And in the film, the people you see, you can also find them on the webpage. You can find their biographies on the webpage. This is advertising also foundations, such as the Sense Foundation and the Byrne Foundation, and they actually claim that they have found ways and means to stop aging altogether. Aubrey de Grey is maybe a person that you've heard of, a Cambridge-based biogerontologist. So biogerontology is the science that tries to find medication to stop aging. He says at 25 it would be ideal to stop aging, when he was asked. Anyway, you see the metaphors of this movie. And in her excellent article, Let the Reader Think of the Burden, Old Age and the Crisis of Capacity, Andrea Cherise from Toronto argues that imagery such as the Silver Tsunami and the like testifies to the, and the quote, barely conscious, figurative language that serves to construct perceptions of an aging population. And I'm now quoting from the press kit of the Silver Tsunami. And this article, I can really recommend The Crisis of Capacity by Andrea Therese. Since January 2011, boomers have been turning 65 every 8 seconds, 10,000 per day, 4 million per year. In 2030, there will be over 70 million seniors in the US alone. Well-researched and filled with astonishing statistics on our aging world population, Silver Tsunami presents strong, undeniable evidence that the world is on the verge of a devastating epidemic, an epidemic that will impact every facet of society and test the strength of local and national government infrastructures with a multitude of diseases and costly care. So you see that this is a discourse that frames old age as disaster, as epidemic, as something, a catastrophe, something you have to get off the beach, get away. How? How? What is the solution those people have? They say they can do this medically, and as cultural gerontologists, we wouldn't argue stop medical treatments, stop medical advancements, not at all. What we argue in cultural gerontology is we have to change the way we look at aging. We can't other it. We can't see age, we shouldn't see age and aging and old age especially as the other. That's the problematic conception that lies at the basis of such such narratives there. We have to oppose this decline narrative and see aging as a normal, and old age too, as a normal part of the life course. So what could we do? Geronticide? Actually, these are the pictures you find when Googling Silver Tsunami. As the Daily Telegraph reports about Martin Amis, the son of Kingsley Amis, you probably know Martin Amis, the British writer, who is 60, he predicted that the civil war would break out between young and old within 10 or 15 years because of the pressures of supporting what he describes as a silver tsunami. He asked, how is society going to support the silver tsunami? There'll be a population of demented, very old people, like an invasion of terrible immigrants stinking out the restaurants and cafes and shops. See, again, this metaphor there. Of course, he was bashed for saying that. And in the Mail Online, we can read that Amis, quote, suggested that widespread euthanasia was the solution. There should be a booth on every street corner where you could get a martini and a medal before taking your life, he said. So automatic suicide booths, and you can see this model down here, that could be placed on street corners. He said, of course, he was saying that in a satirical manner, but I read the interview and it's not that satirical, so he's had some criticism because of his attitude there. Yeah, and you also see Grey Dawn here. I'll briefly talk about that book later by Peter G. Peterson. In my book about the nursing homes, I have discovered another narrative of old age. It's not only an epidemic, a disaster, a catastrophe. Nursing homes also house the living dead. And these are a couple of covers that I have in my bookshelf. You see how they are portrayed. So it's the living dead. Other metaphors contain those of old age as zombies. Othering, of course, again. So, in other words, why is cultural gerontology important? You can just replace here the Gerontology jokes by Antiaging Medicine. Okay, and this already takes me to part 3. Just have to check how I'm doing time-wise. 22 minutes gone. All right, so we're now already at part 3. And I'd like to share with you now a cultural gerontologist, this word is so hard for me today, a cultural gerontologist's toolbox, and show you how we can use our toolboxes here. In the third part of this paper, we'll look at how authors deal with the burden narrative of old age. I will focus on the figure of the nursing home as a space of exclusion that contains the purportedly burdensome and deviant aspects of old age. I'll look at Margaret Atwood's short story, Torching the Dusties. Torching means setting fire to the Dusties, and you can imagine what that is. And I'll briefly compare it just to give you the context of in which such narratives develop. As a context, I will compare it to Anthony Trollops' 1882 satirical text, The Fixed Period. Does anybody know The Fixed Period? Has anybody read it? Okay. I would like to explore the marginalization of old age and the ageism manifested in spatial segregation in Atwood's apocalyptic short story, which appeared as a closing tale in her latest collection, Stone Mattress, and that came out in 2014. And I'm quite proud that I got to meet Margaret Atwood. And there was in Phoenix, Arizona, and Maureen Goggin and I, we went to Margaret Atwood's reading there. It was about eco-criticism and ecological stuff. But then she signed her latest books, and of course I had to get the collection because I'm really a fan of Margaret Atwood's. And I discovered the short story in there. And I was just working in January, I was working on completing my book, and that just came in time, that short story about the nursing home, because my book is on nursing homes. And I also had to share with you here you had to sign your name on a post-it so she could more easily than just copy it into the book. There was a long queue. And I didn't really know how to make sense of the space of that post-it, so I have a long name, and I divided it, and she did that then also when she signed my book, and I find that very charming. Okay. Margaret Atwood's story, Torching the Dusties. Torching the Dusties centers on Wilma and Tobias, two companions trapped inside Ambrosia Manor, a gated retirement community. Wilma is almost blind, and she relies on Tobias for help in her daily activities of daily living. The story begins when an anti-elderly movement called Our Turn appears at the gates of Ambrosia Manor. The group, operating internationally in millions, gathers around nursing homes wearing baby masks and sets out to literally torch the Dusties by setting care homes on fire all across North America, seeking, as they say, to clear away the parasitic dead wood at the top and the dust balls under the bed. Atwood's tale crystallizes the problem of old age as other, as stigmatized, as unproductive in a society that is based on production and consumption. It highlights the relationship between the space and identity of the aging body as increasingly isolated from social interaction. As this analysis will show, Torching the Dusties resonates with sociologist Haim Hassan's concept of the nursing home as a place of social death. Hassan argues that in complex societies, social death precedes biological death. A person begins to lose social roles and cultural identity prior to the termination of biological existence. The interval between social death and physical death may span a period of many years, and it is one of the fundamental elements of our culture in relation to the aged. The story illustrates the corporeal and spatial dispossession of nursing home inhabitants. Ambrosia Manor has become what Michel Foucault calls a heterotopia of deviation, a place which excludes the old within the social fabric they inhabit, as he argues. Now, just now, a brief excursion to what Foucault calls a heterotopia in his essay of Other Spaces. First, I thought this is a really useful concept for my book, and I'm using it here for this short story. But maybe we can discuss that concept here and also, because I know that some of you work on heterotopias. And Michel Foucault says, in Of Other Spaces, that heterotopic spaces are defined in dependence on and in contrast to utopias, while utopias represent imagined perfections or inversions of society without real space. So utopia is something that doesn't really exist. Heterotopias are real places, effectively enacted utopias, or in the case of involuntary confinement, such as prison or nursing homes, psychiatric wards, dystopias, Foucault writes. There are also, probably in every culture, in every civilization, real places, places that do exist and that are formed in the very founding of society, which are something like counter sites, a kind of effectively enacted utopia in which the real sites, all the other real sites that can be found within the culture, are simultaneously represented, contested, and inverted. Places of this kind are outside of all places, even though it may be possible to indicate their location in reality. Because these places are absolutely different from all the sites that they reflect and speak about, I shall call them, by way of contrast to utopias, heterotopias. So such places can also be psychiatric wards, prisons, hospitals, retirement homes, but also brothels, colonies, or cemeteries. With regard to prisons, hospitals, and retirement or nursing homes, Foucault talks about heterotopias of deviation, places where, as he calls it, individuals whose behavior is deviant in relation to the required mean or norm are placed. So old age here is described as deviant. Yeah? Since in our society where leisure is the rule, idleness is a sort of deviation, he argues. And the picture you see here is of a nursing home in the Netherlands called the Burgt. And a young artist, Hartmut Wilkening, was asked to do some artwork when they opened the nursing home in 2010. And he said, hey, wait a minute. This nursing home, the floor plan here, looks just like the panopticon that you probably are familiar with, the Foucauldian panopticon, this prison kind of structure. And he then said, okay, I know what to do with this. And he constructed a head of Foucault, 7 tons, that had to be put in with a crane and that they can never remove anymore, because then they put the ceiling on, and it's now sitting in the lobby of the nursing home there. Because he said he didn't think of it as a heterotopia or of deviation. He thought about how power circulates and so on. And the nursing home administration didn't mind that Foucault was sitting there, but I think it's really related to this panoptical structure there too, that you can see in the picture. The next person I will introduce to you now is Anthony Trollops, who in the fixed period also talks about the burden narrative of old age. Atwood's story evolves from those narratives. That sprung up from, actually very early, but this is a 19th century example. And it promotes as well as criticizes eugenics and euthanasia as well as geronticide as demographic solutions to the problem of old age, as Heike Hartung writes. An example of such a burden narrative is Trollops' The Fixed Period, a satirical science fiction novel in which the law of the fixed period is introduced by the youthful assembly of the fictive British colony of Britannula. According to this law, all citizens reaching the age of 67 are required to move to an idyllic college termed necropolis, where they are to spend 1 year of honorary retirement before being executed at the age of 67.5. Interestingly, Trollops wrote the text at exactly this age, when he was 67.5 years old, in 1882. As John Neverbend, the novel's first-person narrator, tells us, the fixed period law consists altogether of the abolition of the miseries, the weakness, and the final imbecility of old age, by the pre-arranged ceasing to live of those who would otherwise become old. That ties in with what the video showed us. He supports his argument with statistics. Statistics have told us that the sufficient sustenance of an old man is more costly than the feeding of a young one, as is also the care, nourishment, and education of the as yet unprofitable child. But for whose good are the old and effete to be maintained? While The Fixed Period is obviously a satire, in torching the Dusties, there's a little less of a satirical undercurrent, but there is a satirical undercurrent as well. Atwood's tale is a bitter and dystopic interpretation that portrays possible consequences of ageism, as it is expressed in metaphors that link old age to natural disasters, such as aforementioned Silver Tsunami or the Great Flood, or an age quake. Peter G. Peterson, author of Grey Dawn, How the Coming Age Wave Will Transform America and the World, equates the alleged threat of an aging society to global warming. Oh, sorry, I forgot that passage here. He says, we face a threat more grave and certain than those posed by chemical weapons, nuclear proliferation, or ethnic strife, the age wave. He was actually former CEO of Lehman Brothers. In Atwood's story, Peterson's predictions have become reality. Public discourse about the old has shifted towards a normalization of the old as other. So that's very, very normal to talk about the old as people to be burned down. Well, the public in Atwood's story is hardly debating the issue still about these mobs that gather onto nursing homes. Ambrosia Manor residents are reluctant to notice what is going on around them. They remain like the frog in the experiment with hot water, oblivious to the danger, even when the mob outside the gate grows larger and louder every day and they watch them gathering out there. Atwood cleverly manages to instill doubt in readers whether the continuing assertion by the government that help is on the way is not a lie, also making it clear that resistance will be futile. At the beginning of the story, incidents such as the blocking of the laundry van by the increasingly aggressive group at the gates, are met with curiosity rather than apprehension. At least it gives them, the residents, something to talk about over meals, as the following dialogue reveals. They say they want us to make room, they want us to move over. Some of the signs say that, move over. That means die, I suppose, says Wilma. Are there any rolls today? Sometimes they're the most delicious Parker House rolls, fresh from the oven. The international movement Our Turn, as they call themselves, claims that it was now their turn at life, urging care home residents to give up their space on Earth. Tobias, looking out of the window with Wilma's binoculars, keeps her informed about the latest developments. They say it's their turn, says Tobias. Their turn at what? At life, they say. I heard one of them on the television news. Naturally, they're being interviewed all over the place. They say we've had our turn, those our age. They say we messed it up, killing the planet with our own greed and so forth. They have a point there, says Wilma. We did mess it up, not on purpose, though. Similar to the fixed period, the old are supposed to make room for the young. They're positioned as scapegoats who are guilty of the world's disastrous state, while the young claim to be innocent, which they express in torching the Dusties by wearing baby masks. Chubby, smiling babies. Some say, time to go. Time to go, says Wilma. Babies? What does that mean? This isn't a maternity hospital. About the opposite, she thinks caustically. It's an exit from life, not an entrance. Our Turn begin to ask employees to leave the premises, interpolating all inhabitants into their role of the old, the other, through an unfavorable geriatric gaze, as Hepworth calls it, which literally traps them in the home. The contrast between young and old is established here again as a binary opposite, as a natural difference which manifests itself on the level of space. They have blockaded the gate, Tobias announced. They refuse to let anyone in. Are they letting anyone out? Wilma asks Tobias. Through the blockade, only the staff, says Tobias. They are more or less ordering them to go, not the inhabitants. We have to stay. So they appear to have decreed. We could disguise ourselves, said Wilma, to get out, as well cleaners, Muslim cleaners, with our heads covered up, or something. I doubt very much that we would pass unchallenged, dear lady, Tobias says. It is a question of the generation. Time leaves its markings. Ambrosia Manor, a name typical of Atwood's sense of wicked humor, Ambrosia referring to immortality, becomes a waiting room for death and stands for what Georgia Agamben refers to as bare life. In a different context, though. A body stripped of his or her personhood. One who inhabits such a space is a living dead person, leading a life devoid of value, as Agamben puts it. And I'm quoting this now according to Annette Leibing. The burden narrative, as well as the narrative of physical decline and loss, prevail, and Wilma defines herself through these narratives, knowing that, I quote, a high net worth is no defense against a stroke, a heart attack, or other such things that, quote, occur in Ambrosia Manor every week, unquote. Old people are no longer chased out into the wilderness or put on an ice floor or sent into the woods or pushed off a cliff. Instead, innovative services and goods are developing that seek to capitalize on the silver dollar, as Anne Karpf puts it in her recent New York Times article on gerontophobia. Wilma knows that she's taken care of in a humane way because she pays a large sum for this and she keeps the nurses happy with little presents and little tips. After all, the staff has left the premises. Those who are still able start caring for those who are less able. For the people in advanced living, however, the name bears a certain irony here, there is no help. The connecting doors have been locked and they are consigned to their fate. Telephone lines have been cut, computers, TVs are no longer working. Tobias has started to stock up food and water for Wilma and himself, forging secret escape plans for the two of them. When a courageous group of about 15 Ambrosia Manor inhabitants planned to march out the front door, arguing that as the press was now there, with the world watching, the mob would not dare stop them. But Tobias is skeptical. The whole world has an appetite for ringside seats at such events. Witch burnings and public hangings were always well attended, he argues. Are always well attended. Oh, where was I? In the meantime, the group outside has begun to light fires in oil drums, and Wilma can hear them chanting, "Time to go, fast not slow, burn baby burn, it's our turn," an ominous rhythm. After dark, Tobias and Wilma manage to sneak out. The story ends with Wilma and Tobias watching the bright flames eating Ambrosia Manor. Flames, Wilma can also see if she gazes at them directly, wondering why there are no fire trucks, hearing their fellow residents' fading screams, and hoping they will have a quick death in there. It remains open whether Tobias and Wilma will be able to escape after our turn have left the scene. Tobias indicates that he's planning for them to do so. However, with nursing homes being under attack all across America and globally, readers are left to wonder where the two of them would go next. Wilma and Tobias are tossed into a space beyond, existing as the living dead, who are not even discursively allocated a territory anymore. What Andrea Therese has noted with regard to Anthony Trollops' The Fixed Period can also be applied to Margaret Atwood's tale and brings the story full circle. And I would like to finish with this analysis of Therese. On the one hand, she says, Trollops' novel, as well as Atwood's tale, clarify how demographics and aesthetics conceive of older age as a potentially catastrophic force, and subsequently, how the rhetoric of capacity can be used to disaffiliate the aged from a privileged, non-old social body. On the other hand, even as President John Neverbend employs this conceptual vocabulary to assert the social benefit of his fixed period law, the fixed period also undermines that logic as it applies to the demographer and author alike. Trollops' radical ambivalence concerning the affixing of age to the matter of capacity challenges readers. I conclude to engage in the hard work of imagining later life outside the binary of containment and catastrophe. Likewise, Torching the Dusties lets the reader think of the burden, as Anthony Trollope writes, opening up a discussion of creative changes in long-term care, but also of creative changes regarding the way we perceive of aging and old age. Changes that take into account Margaret Morgenroth Goulet's famous declaration of interdependence, that we are aged by culture. And I think this now here dovetails exactly with what Helen has said in the morning as vital involvement. So we have to really think of this concept carefully and also in the discussion. I will now let you, as listeners, think of the burden of age. I'll let you, the listener, think of the burden, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.